Hey guys, welcome back to Release the Craftin. Priscilla here with a little Release the Craftin's book club review, or the RTC book club because that's so much easier to say. If you do not know, I have a monthly book club thing. It's an open book club, so you're welcome to join or leave at any time. We have like a regular chat on Instagram, and we read a book together every month, and we're on the 11th month. It is now November, so we have 2 more books to read for the year. Really excited because it looks like we're gonna hit the goal that I set myself of last year of reading all these different Greek myth retellings. We're there. We're doing it. We're in the thing. We're doing the stuff. So last month for October, we read Medea by Eilish Quin. And yeah, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to give you guys my opinions. I'll let you know when the spoilers are coming up, and you can dip out if you want to read the book. But if you just want to know what we're reading for next month, because maybe you want to join in all the fun, next month we are reading The Children of Jocasta by Natalie Haynes. So that will be the book for the month of November. So feel free to pick that up and join in the reading. Or if you have already read it, it's relatively new, so I would be surprised. But also, like, go off. You can join in the chat. So even if you haven't read along with us, but if you've read the book before, you're welcome to join in to the book club chat and just, hang out and have a good time chatting and, making new friends and doing the thing. It's been really enjoyable. I love the stuff that we do there. So at any rate, let's jump in to Medea by Eilish Quin. I liked this book. I actually really liked this book. I didn't know how I was going to feel, honestly, when I went in. Because Medea can be kind of a polarizing figure, and it depended a lot, like a lot of my opinion hinged on how she was personally portrayed, because she is, if you are not familiar with her myth, often depicted as like sort of not necessarily a femme fatale, but sort of in that bubble. She's depicted as a villain in a lot of literature and in her own mythology. And it's very interesting because a lot of the things in the myth sort of set her up to be in a position where she has to be the villain, and like she doesn't have a choice because she's dealing with men all the time around her, and like her response to that has to be like for her own survival. And like there's just a lot in her mythology that would indicate that she's sort of put into this position where she has no other option, and she's just sort of trying to figure her way out, and her answer every time is like the violent, atrocious one. So is it the right answer? Not necessarily, but like there's a lot to be sympathetic with in regards to Medea's story. So I was really sort of hinging my opinion on the book on how they decided to portray that aspect of her character, because it's so multifaceted, and I was pleasantly surprised. I thought that they did it really well. There was a lot of room for nuance, and I thought that the story was pretty well. So in my rating of things that don't really matter, I would give this like 8 potion bottles out of whatever, because the numbers don't matter. I found it to be fairly enjoyable. It was easy to read. I liked the narration style, the story style. The narrator was pretty good. I liked it. I liked it. So I don't really have much in the non-spoilery way to say about it, because most of the things that I thought about are huge spoilers for the story. There were a couple of little things here and there that I like irked me a little bit, but I will say I did like Medea as a character in the book. I thought that she was delightfully complex. I could be on her side, but also be like, whoa, no, that's not the right answer, and like, be on the side, not on her side, throughout different points in the story. And sometimes I was just like, this is an interesting choice you're making, but I'm not mad at you for it. And so I really enjoyed following her character's story. I liked that they fleshed out her relationship with her brother, because that is also like a big part of her story. And even, I think, in the way that Jason was depicted, it was absolutely deplorable. I hated him so much. But his depiction was really good and really, like, well done. My previous complaints when it comes to these kind of stories is that the male characters tend to be like one dimensional, but I think we got a little bit more of that with her relationship with Jason and her relationship with her brother. There was some more depth there. Even with her relationship with her father, there was a little bit more depth with the male characters that I'm typically accustomed to when these types of stories come around, because they tend to go one way or the other, where they're either like fully fleshed out characters, which is rare, or they're very one dimensional, just archetypal type characters with a name plastered to them in these like feminist retellings of Greek mythology. So it was nice to get a character like Jason who had more than one side to him and wasn't just like outright a horrible villain person from day one. There was a lot of like interesting depth there that I really want to touch on when I get to my spoiler review. But yeah, I think that's everything I had to say. I think the story was really well put together, and I enjoyed it. I surprisingly enjoyed it. I was like a little bit on the fence because I didn't know how I was going to feel, like I said, until the end of the book. And when I got there, I was like, huh, wow, okay, I actually really enjoyed this. So let's talk spoilers. Let's talk about the book, okay? So, spoilers. Leave now if you do not want this book spoiled for you. I do not want any comments about how I ruined the book for you, so depart. Please, read the book. It was enjoyable. You'll like it, and then you can come back and tell me about it. So, the thing that, like, irked me right off the bat with this book, okay? I swear to you I like this book. But the thing that irked me right away was the depiction that not only was Medea different than, like, her siblings, but in the not like the other girls sense. Like, she wasn't as beautiful as her sister. She didn't have the same features. She didn't look like her mother. She didn't have all these things. Like, there was, like, a list of things, like, of quota that she did not meet to be, like, the ideal perfect woman in her, like, limited worldview of what women are supposed to be. And I was already irritated when I read that, because I was like, why can't we just have a story where the female protagonist is just a normal person? Like, they're not so othered by their appearance or by their attitude that, like, they're not like other girls. And, you know, you have to deal with that whole, like, sort of weird dynamic that sort of leans a little bit left into like pick me territory. I really just hate that depiction, because I think there's a lot to be said of just being like a normal person who feels like maybe they're on the outside or is on the outside for other reasons, but not on the reasons based solely on like their femininity or their outward like personal appearance in comparison to other women. I really feel pretty strongly about that depiction. So I was already set to be like, this book is balls, with the way that they sort of depicted how different Medea was in her personal appearance and how that set her apart so much from her sisters and her family, because she wasn't like a ray of sunshine, essentially. You know, she was sort of the gloomy emo child comparatively to her bright, happy sister and eventually her bright, happy brother. And I was like, yeah, but you look like your parents. You're just a different mix of your parents. So it's not like you're so separate from reality that, like, you know, you're the redheaded child in a family with no redheads. Like, you're just a normal girl who looks a little bit different than her sister, but not different than her family. And, like, they managed to bring it back a little bit by going more into, like, her personality and her having sort of different wants and desires and not being on the same path that her sister is. And I was like, okay, so, like, this personality difference makes more sense to me, and this I would have preferred to be the I'm not like other girls part, just her personality. And I think we could have downplayed that in relation to her physical appearance. This is totally a personal gripe, by the way, because this is just, like, one of those things where, like, I read a lot of YA, so when I'm reading those books, it's usually like that, where they're like, I'm not like other girls, I run and play and, like, hang out with the boys, and I don't have pretty blonde hair and blue eyes. And you're like, that doesn't make you not like the other girls. Like, not every girl has blonde hair and blue eyes, but also the girls who have blonde hair and blue eyes can also run and play and hang out with the boys. Like, that's not the line that we draw, you know? So, like, that's one of those things that, like, when I read that in books, I'm just like, why? So when I read that, I was like, oh my god, okay, here we go, I'm in for it. But then, you know, it managed to swerve delightfully into a direction that wasn't focused on her physical appearance. It came up a couple of times, but not in the way that it was like the crux of her personality, where she was like, I don't look as pretty as my sister, I'll never be like, successful or happy. Or she didn't do that. So I was like, oh, thank God. Okay. So they leaned harder into the fact that her personality is what set her apart, and the fact that she is a little bit more clever and a little bit more cunning than her siblings, and she's a little bit better at weathering the landscape around her because she is a little bit more self-aware. I was like, okay, this makes more sense. I like this direction, and I'm glad that we leaned into that direction instead of focusing on the fact that she doesn't look like everybody else. But all that to say, and I'm going to tell you guys right now, I have forgotten everyone's names except for Medea and Jason. So it is what it is. We're just gonna have to power through, because I meant to get this review done on time and then forgot that I needed to do the review, and then by the time I remembered, it was late, and then I was later because I had crafting stuff to do, and that took precedent. So here we are. We're just gonna get through it. But I think in the very beginning of the story, there is a section where she helps, but kind of fails. But fails in the attempt, not fails in the actual, like, going out to help somebody. She helps this boy who comes up to her shore after it's the craziest, like, sentence to say, but he was flying on a golden ram who crashed into the sea, and so she jumps in to help him, but then she ends up getting overwhelmed by the water, so he ends up helping her back to shore. And they have this very interesting dynamic where I was like, this is a little bit icky, because he's definitely stated to be older than her, but not so much dramatically older than her that it's like grooming behavior, just that he's old enough to be in a different category age-wise as her. They're both still minors, so there's a lot of weird things happening, but he's definitely a teenager and she's like just barely preteen stage, so like, there's a weird thing here. But she has like her first crush on this guy, and he's very nice to her. He treats her very sweetly. But I think a lot of that is very normal to display. Like, a younger, like, girl will tend to have feelings for a slightly older boy, especially when they treat her well, and she's getting attention from a boy that she didn't really expect to get, and he's being extra kind, and he's also good looking. Like, that's a normal thing in human development. Preteen girls do that all the time. It happens, right? So I was like, this is very natural and normal, but it gives me like the ick a little bit. More so when she starts to like think about it, and like her dad has her give him a love potion so that he will marry her sister, because he turns it down. He's like adamantly, I don't want to get married to anybody. Marriage ruined my life, so like I don't trust women. I don't want to get married, which is disappointing for Medea, because she was kind of like, oh, maybe one day he'll kind of marry me, but he was like, no, I don't want to get married to anybody. So he rejects the offer from the king to marry his oldest daughter, which is Medea's sister. And so then the king has Medea start to drug him, because he is favorable towards her, and trusts her. So she has to drug him with a love potion so that he will fall in love with her sister, so that they'll get married and the king can get what he wants. And there's like a moment where he is drugged by this potion where he starts to size up Medea in a not so kosher, like, friendly way, and it is so icky, icky. And I hated it so much, but like I do think it does go a long way to tell how women get viewed and depicted, and how this does happen to young girls even without the advent of a love potion in play. And like the constant threat from men that she had to become aware of immediately, because once they viewed her as a sexual object, then she became like in a position where she was threatened. And mind you, he does come back and apologize for that scenario and kind of brushes it off as like, oh, I don't know where my head was, but he was underneath the influence as well. So there's like a double ickiness to it, because it's not really him, it's not in his character, but because of this like powerful magic happening, he's acting out of sorts and being taken advantage of in the same way that she is also experiencing like a negative impact of this behavior. And I think it's like the first point where she starts to see like how bad things can play out if she's not in control. And essentially the crux of Medea's entire life is like being plagued with an overly strict kind of asshole for a father, and an absentee, like, manic pixie mother, because her mother is a naiad. an oceanid, because she's a nymph from the sea. So I think that is an oceanid. And her father like tricked her into being together so she would make him babies essentially. And as time goes on, she periodically spends more and more time away at sea, away from her children, and she'll come back to shore, be with them for a little bit, and then like fuck off. But at some point, she gives birth to her youngest child, her son, and has a horrible vision of Medea cutting him into pieces. So she becomes even more distant, even more like keeping Medea at arm's length and treating her as other. And then eventually gets to the point where she tells Medea what happens. Like, she tells her that she had a vision of her brother being cut up into pieces. And so it sends Medea on this path to go out of her way to learn magic. She tries to learn it from her father, but once her father realizes he's having a son, he's like, fuck off, child, I don't need you anymore. I don't need to pass on my legacy to you. So she has to learn it in secret and by herself. And she becomes obsessed with like trying to prevent her brother from having to suffer this fate. And it's like the entire course of her life is set up this way because of the actions of her parents, and because her mother chose to sort of dump all of this trauma onto her and be like, hey, you're going to be totally responsible for fixing this, because I don't even want to be involved in the process. Like, I'm just telling you all this trauma so you can like deal with that. And literally telling Medea is what puts her on the path and what sets up her brother for this to happen in the first place. Because if no one had told Medea, she never would have pressed into learning magic. She wouldn't have learned this particular magic, and it never would have happened. So it's sort of one of those self-fulfilling prophecies. And I think this is the point, like, when she's drugging that young man, where she's getting the negative side of magic, because at this point she hasn't really suffered any negative impact of using magic in any sort of way, because she's been practicing it on her own, improving her own skills and getting better and better, but never getting like a backlash from it. Nobody's really dealing with it. Even like there's a moment where like a servant in the house kind of catches on to what's happening and starts to talk about it, but that servant gets shut down because they're a slave, not a servant. And they're like, how dare you question the house? So like she gets away from all of this stuff sort of consequence free. And then when her father puts her in a position where she has no choice but to use magic on this young man, she has to brew the potion herself and deliver it. And then she sees it in real time how this can backfire when things aren't in her control, when she's not acting in her best interest. And it sort of, I think, sets the framework for how she views things going forward. So when it is finally revealed, because her mother does finally come back for like a moment to tell her that she was the person cutting up her brother into pieces, she's like, oh, well, shit, like, that's never gonna happen. Why would I do that? That's crazy. And then she has to turn around and then deal with something else out of her control, because the gods decide to get involved in her business. And Aphrodite comes down and sticks her with one of Eros's arrows and is like, yeah, you're going to fall in love with this guy who's coming up here. He's Hera's champion, and you're going to do this. This is the life we set up for you. And she's like, wait, I don't want any of this. I just wanted to protect my brother. I don't want to be in love with some fucking dude because you guys said so. In fact, I'm not even interested in love, because her first like crush kind of spurned her and got married with her sister, and then sort of kind of figured out that he had been drugged and that Medea was the one doing it. So he became completely distant to her, and she lost that connection that she was sort of craving. And, you know, had to sort of crush that dream that there was possibly a chance for her to be happy with this man, because her father had other plans, and her father is super domineering. He's also abusive. And he doesn't care about his girl children. He cares about the advantage of marrying them off and keeping them under his thumb, to the point where, like, he's so determined to be in control that he threatens Medea with having her memories wiped entirely so that he can marry her off to some old, like, kingly dude and like form the alliance that he wants to form. Whatever the fuck he wants to do. I don't care about his plan. But he wants to wipe her memories so that she'll forget about magic, forget about all the things, and be completely compliant and tame for this dude he wants her to marry. And he kind of gives her the opportunity to pick her own suitor at some point. So she does develop a relationship with the king of Athens, who's a little bit older than her. And he's nice. He's a nice guy who seems to genuinely like her. But he's already been married before. And he's just like, yeah, no, you're really pretty. And I wouldn't mind having you over to like have a child with and like be my friend and hang out. So he's like the best option when she wants no option. She doesn't want to get married in the first place. So she's kind of in this position where she's like, okay, I have to decide if I'm going to marry this guy, because if I agree to marry this guy, then my dad is going to wipe my memories and I'm going to be all fucked up anyways. So I don't want to agree to marry any guy, but this is the best guy out of all of them because this guy seems to genuinely like me and not just want me, for like my body. But then it doesn't matter if she loses all of her memories. So when the gods do get involved and they interfere, that's when Jason shows up on their shores. And Jason is Jason from Jason and the Argonauts, who I talked about a little bit in my Atalanta video. I may have talked about it a lot of it. I don't remember how much I talked about it, but I gave more of a backstory for that whole myth there, if you're not familiar with that mythology. But Jason shows up and she sees him first, so that's the guy that she falls in love with. And I don't think she really comes to terms with the fact or recognizes that her feelings for Jason are not like real. They're not based in reality. I don't think she ever really comes to terms with that in the course of the story. If she does, I maybe missed it, but I don't think I did. Because I don't think, she mentions like once again, like one time I think, that Aphrodite was involved in like hooking them up. So she doesn't know if this is love, and she doesn't really know if that's what she's feeling. But she guesses that this is what she's feeling because she's never felt this way before. And, all she can think about is him. And she kind of mentions that she's having these feelings and in relation to Aphrodite and like the way that the gods have sort of interfered in her life to set this up and set this in motion. But I don't think she actually holds them accountable or like recognizes that her feelings are entirely manufactured, and that she probably wouldn't have chosen Jason had she gotten a second to get to know him, because everything starts happening very quickly. Once Jason shows up, she promises to help him as long as he takes her and her brother away, because she fears for what will happen to her brother if left in her father's care without her. And at this point, she's basically become like his mother, because her mom left and she had to raise him for a while. And so it's more like parentification and feeling that like mother-son relationship versus brother-sister relationship, although she still views him as her brother and they still talk to each other in that way. But she is sort of motherly over him, so that's their dynamic. So she doesn't want to leave her brother behind, so she goes all in with Jason, and she's like, here's the deal. And then Jason's like, yeah, totally, and then you can be my wife. Because why? Because they just met and she's pretty and he's into it, and he can tell that she's into him, and she's just like, I don't know what the fuck's happening to me, but here we go. So she offers up her services. She helps Jason complete all of the tasks that her father set so he can get the golden fleece. Her father really has no intention of giving over the golden fleece, so they have to use a lot of trickery to get away, and part of the trickery is using her knowledge of magic, because at this point she's not just like a magical witch type person, she's a freaking necromancer because she has taught herself how to cut up animals and put them back together and bring them back to life. That's what she's spent all of her time doing since her mom set her on this path, is becoming a necromancer, not just a witch. And she's good at it now. So part of her plan is to distract her father by making him go pick up all the pieces of his son so that he can give his son a proper burial. But that's fake. The pieces are going to be magic to look like her brother. But for some reason, she actually has to chop up her brother and then put him back together in order for this plan to work, which that point lost me once I heard the part about how she was going to spell pieces of like an animal to look like her brother when they tossed it into the ocean so that her dad would have to pick them all up. I was like, why don't you just spell an animal to look like your brother and then chop it all up? I don't know how magic works in this universe, so I don't know if that was possible, but it was the first question I had. So then she chops up her brother and manages to successfully bring him back to life. And Then she has to deal with the entirety of the crew of the Argonauts, which is like 40 dudes and one other woman, which Atalanta never makes a feature in this story, which I was like, that's wild, because she's the only other woman on the ship. So the only other person that, like, Medea could probably commiserate with. Granted, they don't have a lot in common because Atalanta is in that archetype of not like the other girls, where she is, like, one of the boys and doesn't really look at women that way, especially after you read the story of Atalanta. You can tell she's not a girl's girl, but like in this story she could have been a girl's girl. We don't know. We never got to interact with her, which I thought was just such a missed opportunity, because she was the only other woman on the ship who maybe could have been a little bit sympathetic. Now, granted, one of the sailors, whose name I've already forgotten, I'm sorry, is sympathetic to her situation, and not like sympathetic in the like, oh, I'm so sorry that you had such a rough life kind of thing, but in the, we've all probably at one point killed somebody we shouldn't have. I killed one of my siblings, so like, I get it. Other people on this boat have also killed one of their siblings. None of us brought our siblings back from the dead. So all of these guys are being super hypocritical in the way that they are treating you because you're a woman. Like, that's what's happened. And he's like really real about it. And I really appreciate his opinion. But I also like thought it was very interesting because their dynamic, like, they get closer and closer and closer as time goes on. And I was like, oh girl, leave Jason for this guy. Because the entire time that Jason is with her, he's only into Medea as long as she can benefit him. Anytime that she gives the impression that she might not benefit him or she can't solve his problem for him, he turns on her. And he doesn't just turn on her in like a dismissive kind of way. He turns on her in a violent way. He gets like verbal with her. He gets like to the point where he's intimidating her. There's a lot of implied abuse there. Sort of echoing the way that her father would treat her. She sees that a lot in the way that Jason treats her. And then because she is desperate to cling on to this man that she's obsessed with because she's been hit by a love arrow, you know, she goes out of her way to help him. And every time she does this, it's at like great personal cost to herself. And not like in a physical sense necessarily. That does come up later on when it comes to like birthing his children and having to bear the weight of all of that and all the raising and all the things like that. All the labor she has to do after the children come around is where the cost to herself physically comes in. But it's in the cost of like her reputation, how she's being perceived. People think she's like a wicked, awful, horrible witch. And, you know, they treat her like that. And she has to continue to like bear that burden and carry that throughout the entirety of the story. And it's what puts her in these positions where she makes these decisions, words are really hard, where she makes this choice, I'm not going to try it again, to make these like really drastic, dramatic decisions. It's like it's just wild, the things that she has to do. And I think the way that the story is written really gets across that like she's the type of person who will go low. Like, she is 100%. She will go as low as it takes to preserve herself, her family, the people she cares about. She will take the most drastic, lowest choice if that's the one available to her. But she always finds herself in this position where she's backed into these corners where there is no other option. The option is either to make the horrendous choice or be shunned by her husband and potentially left behind or abandoned or killed or made to forget things. Like, she's always in a position where like these men don't leave her room for other options. And it's not until you get towards the end of the story where when they get back to Jason's like home kingdom, he can't figure out how to get his uncle to hand over his kingdom on his own. God forbid he had a fucking solution for when his uncle was like, psych, I'm not giving it up for the fleas. I don't care that you went all this way to go get it so you could have your kingdom back. I'm not giving up the throne. And he gets like a tantrum hissy fit because Medea's like, I don't know what to do. Like, what do you want me to do to fix this? And he's like, why would I have even brought you here if you weren't going to fucking do shit for me and solve all my problems? Because I'm an incredible fucking man-child who just has women doing all sorts of things for me because my patron goddess is Hera. And Hera, like, got me out of all this hot water. So, like, I'm used to having someone do this for me. So, therefore, my wife should do shit for me. So, because she feels like she has no choice, she ends up tricking his uncle, the king, into believing that she can restore his youth by letting her chop him up into pieces and bring him back. And she proves it by showing him her brother, who is still alive, although slowly recovering from like his whole necromantic process. He ends up scarred for life because of this. So like, was it worth it? We don't know. He has a hard road ahead of him as well. But like, she ends up convincing him not only that she can do this, but he needs to have someone who loves him do this. So she has to have all of his daughters stab him and cut him up into pieces so that this can happen. So not only does she kill the king, she traumatizes all of his children, who seem all too ready to do it, except for the youngest child, who's like, I don't want to do it, you're making me miserable. And then she gets forced to do it, realizes that this was all part of Medea's plan, was for them to assassinate their father, and then has to deal with that forever. Thanks to Medea. And then when she does this, does Jason like stage a coup, take his throne back? No. He gets mad at her for making the most drastic choice possible, making him look bad in the process, and then they have to get back on their ship and leave. And it's not till they get to some other fucking city, I forgot, that they can settle down for a little bit and have their regular life. So she's able to give birth, you know, raise her kids in peace. And then Jason is taking up going to the palace to sort of feed off of the goodwill of the king there, who enjoys his company. But he spends more and more time at the palace and less time at home, which like for Medea is like a break. She's so thankful to be away from her husband and just enjoy her quiet life with her brother and her raising her children together. She has twins, and they're having a great time. Like, they're all happy together, and she's hoping that this can be the way it is forever. And like when her husband comes home, she's like, yeah, the sex is great, but like otherwise I don't care about this guy. Like, I guess we're in love, but I'm also okay when he's not around. And it's because she's walking this weird line of having to deal with him being abusive when she's not useful, to like love bombing her when she is and when he wants something from her. And like, I think the way that it's portrayed in the story is done well to sort of get that point across. I would have liked it to be a little bit more transparent. I think it could have done that a little bit more, but it doesn't really need to be super in your face to pick up what the author is putting down. It's there. It's on paper, and you can see that she's dealing with having an abusive, toxic partner. That's not necessarily of her choice, but she doesn't really reconcile that it's not of her choice. And that's the thing that like irked me, was that she doesn't really come to terms with the fact that she didn't choose this man. It was chosen for her. And now she's in this situation because of this man. And she's had to make these choices because of other men, like her father and Jason, putting her into these situations. And while they're there, Jason ends up sending a letter, which is like sending a text to break up with your ex, except that the ex is your wife, and you're announcing your divorce and your plan to remarry a younger, prettier version via text message. That's essentially what Jason does. He sends a letter. He's like, hey, I'm going to marry this other woman. I will be coming around to collect the children. Fuck you and everything that you've done for me to get me to this point. I'm going to be a king over here now because I'm supposed to be king. So Medea, at this point, finally starts making moves in a way that benefit her, but also in a vengeance way. Like, she's now going through the, like, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned phase of her life, where she's going raise earth, like scorched earth, because she's finally hit the limit, right? And now she's not making the decisions because she has no other choice, because she had other choices. She absolutely had other choices. This is one of those moments where she had other choices and chose not to take them, as opposed to other times where she didn't really have that many other choices available to her outside of like submit and be forced to forget and, you know, fuck off happily into the sunset with your milquetoast husband. So she decides to send a poison dress to the new bride as a gift, which, like, for the new bride, I know she was young, but that there's a level. Like, Medea's not super old. So, like, they're almost the same age by the time that this happens, because Medea was, like, 18, 19, 20-ish when she left with Jason, and her twins are a couple years old, so she's still mid-20s, so the bride is probably freshly legal. And so the age gap is not huge, was what I'm saying, between her and Medea. And, like, But the level of naivety to then put on the dress that your future husband's, your fiance's ex-wife sent you as a gift is wild. But she puts it on. The dress is poisoned. This girl dies. Unfortunately, it's not her fault. And I was like, this is where Medea stopped being a girl's girl right here. When she punished the other woman for this problem. So she kills this young princess, and she decides that she's going to punish Jason by making him watch her chop up their children, because she has the ability to chop people up and put them back together again and bring them back to life. Except at this point, her brother is not on her side. He's like, no, I don't want anything to happen to these children. It's not worth it. Even if Jason does take them, they'll still be happy living in a palace. Like, I would rather that happen than risk anything happening to these children that I love, which is a very reasonable sentiment. Her brother is a voice of reason throughout this entire time. He's so baby girl and sweet that, like, her brother really deserved better than what he got. But, like, there's nothing to do. There's nothing to change it. I feel bad for her brother. I'm glad that he survives, because in the original mythology, he died, and that was it. He got chopped up into pieces, tossed into the ocean, and that was the end of it. And they don't really talk about the relationship between Medea and her brother, so I like this addition to the story. I liked it a lot. Her brother was top 10 out of 10. But she decides to do this because this is now about getting her lick back and getting her vengeance against Jason for not just wronging her in this one moment, but for wronging her the entire course of their relationship and sort of using her as a tool for him to climb the ladder until he no longer could use her that way, until she was no longer useful. Then he discards her and he starts on with the next person who's going to be useful to him, because Jason is a user. And she cuts up her children, and then she tries to put them back together again, but it turns out the gods were like, hey, you did it one time and we didn't really love it, but you don't get to do it again. And yeah, they let her know. Like, Zeus Thunderbolt was like, no. So she ends up actually murdering the children that she loves, because the gods weren't going to let her play life or death, like, master anymore. Which is sad, and it's tragic, and it gets to the point where, like, it now has damaged her relationship with her brother, who was, like, her ride or die up until this point, because he has such a hard time forgiving her, and he's like, eventually we're gonna be okay, but, like, I don't know if I can forgive you for this. This was too far, too much, and I told you not to do it, and you did it anyways. You insisted we did it, and now, like, my niece and nephew are dead. And like, I think that's a really realistic response. Like, he loves his sister. They're absolutely devoted to each other. And he's like, I'm not going to stop being with you and being, like, about you and being close to you. I love you. Like, so we're not severing that tie, but this is going to be really hard to get over because this was a step too far. So she has to deal with the consequences of her actions on a personal level, because this is the one time that she went above and beyond what was actually required for the situation. She could have just got on that boat and fucked off into the sunset with her children. If she had just scheduled to leave before Jason got there, none of this would have happened. You know, like, there were options here. She did not have to do that. She could have also let Jason take the children, and they would have lived as a prince and princess in the palace and been very well taken care of. There was also that option, and I understand not wanting to do that because fuck Jason, that's why. But, like, it's fucking sad. That was the saddest part in the whole freaking book, you guys. It made me, like, miserable to realize, like, I knew the story. I know her kids don't survive, but to see it play out like that, in that way, I was like, this is the saddest shit I have read in a long time. And, like, her children were little rays of sunshine, too. Like, they brought her so much happiness. They brought her and her brother so much happiness. They were just little balls of joy. They were both distinctly different personalities. They had different, like, things. We got to read about them for quite a bit, so it was enough to form an attachment to them. So losing them was devastating. I was like, oh no, I know what's coming, and I'm still upset. So she does manage to go back to what I believe was Athens. I think I have that part right. And barter on the goodwill of the king that was into her, like, 6 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when she was up as an eligible bachelorette. And he's like, yeah, you can totally stay with me and have all my goodwill. And she's like, I'll do whatever you want. I know magic. I'm a sorceress. Like, what can I do for you? And he's like, be my friend. Rest, relax, recover. And she's, like, so not used to being gaslit by men and not like having men manipulate her or try to want something from her. This is absolutely flabbergasting for her. She has no idea how to like deal with this, like a situation where a man doesn't want anything from her, and he's like honest with her and upfront. He's like, yeah, I do want to be with you, and I would still love to be with you, like that, those feelings never went away, but I just want you to be comfortable here and like take part of my hospitality as my friend. You don't owe me anything for that. And she's like, the fuck? So she ends up just proposing that she'll get married to him so that she can stay, because she's afraid that he'll find out what she did and then he'll kick her out and her brother out and they'll have nowhere to go. So she's like desperate to like lock him in, and he's like, yeah, sure, you can get married to me if you want to. Not a requirement, by the way. You don't have to. I wouldn't mind having a son though, to like pass on my legacy and my kingdom to, if you don't mind. And she's like, absolutely, whatever the fuck you want. I'll have one child with you. That's what we're gonna do. Just do not kick out me and my brother. And he's like, again, you do not have to worry about that. That's not gonna happen. And it's so funny to see like a man in the story flip the script on her, because other than her brother, like all the men in the story are basically shit to her except for her brother and that one guy in the Argonauts whose name I forgot, who was decent to her but really didn't offer her much in the way of escape from her situation. But all the other men she's interacting with want something from her, and they put her in these horrible positions where she has to make horrible decisions. So coming up against a man who actually didn't want anything from her but her, just like, hey, I want you for you, not what you can do for me, threw her for a fucking loop. She did not know how to respond. And so they end up getting married. She gives him a son, and it's not quite the same vibe as it was with her first two children, but she is happier again, and she manages to settle down with her brother, and things get back to normal, or what can be considered normal, after all of these horrible things have happened, and they live happily ever after, and that's the end of the story. And I thought this was such a great way to wrap up her story, because one, it doesn't make her like the irredeemable villain that the mythology does, because in the mythology, like I said, it's basically she ruthlessly kills her brother, and then, you know, she ruthlessly kills her children, and she ruthlessly kills this bride. And in this story, she ruthlessly killed the bride. That was ruthless. But everything else was like, she killed her brother out of necessity. She killed her children because she felt like it was necessary, but it wasn't. And she failed to bring them back. So she had to suffer the consequences of that. And that was devastating for her. And for me, I was reading. And so I think it's just a really interesting story, and the way that they chose to tell her story was really interesting. There was even an afterword from the author about how much time she spent like looking up like how Greek like magic used to be in antiquity, and when it was pharmakia, and which is the root of the word of pharmacy, but like how that used to be, and trying to incorporate that as the most realistic like way that they used to practice it as an element in this story, with like the addition of herbs and how they would brew stuff up together to perform pharmakia, was really interesting and fascinating. And I just appreciated that the author took extra time to take that like level of research to add it to the story, because it did make the magic seem a lot more grounded and believable, even though it was very fantastical. So I really like that. Oh, and she's Cersei's like great niece, or just niece, a great niece. I don't remember. She's related to Cersei. So there's a point where she goes to the island, Cersei's island, and they get cleansed for their sins, her and Jason do, and then they get married on the island. But she has this very interesting conversation with Cersei that sort of like, what am I trying to say? Shine some light on how her father was before. Like he got married and all this stuff happened. Their relationship between him and Cersei, and like why there was something in there that maybe caused her father to turn into this like deplorable asshole of a person who's like maybe a little bit in love with Cersei. Gross, but like it was in there. But I thought it was really interesting to get that perspective, but I also just really loved the depiction of Cersei and how she's like a cool witchy person and doing witchy person things, and she was just like, yeah. Great. I'm so glad to see that somebody else in the family has picked up the magic and that you're actually really good at it. And I'm a badass person. You're a badass person. Like recognizes like. It was a very cute little moment. It wasn't very long. I honestly could have spent ages and ages just listening to Cersei's stuff, but the story's not about Cersei. It's about Medea. So that just a little additional bit of joy that I found in the story. But I just think it's really interesting because I don't think, like, I was 100% on Medea's side all the time because I was like, girl, leave his ass, dump his ass, get out of there. And other times I was just like, no, you don't have to take, like, the scorched earth option. You could do other things. You didn't have to kill that girl. The girl did nothing. But at the same time, I didn't find her to be irredeemable. I think I could stand in the same, like, side of the field as her brother, where it's like, hey, this was not okay. It's going to take forever for me to forgive you, but I'm with you. Like, I'm still here on your side. Because I feel like she was justified in a lot of her behaviors and a lot of her actions. And I feel like it went a very long way to show that, like, she was a villain. Yes, she did villainous things. But a lot of that was taken out of her hands, or she was pushed into a corner. And she had to take these extreme options, or she felt like she had to in some cases, to preserve herself and her sense of security and her brother's sense of security and well-being. And that she would take these choices to make those things happen, to keep the people she cares about safe. I thought it was a really great way, a really nuanced way to tell her tale. So I really enjoyed the book. I found it very, very enjoyable. And I hope that you guys liked this review that was only supposed to be 20 minutes, but here we are at 44. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate your faces. You guys, let me know what you think of Medea or of the story in the comments below. And then, as per usual, we'll be carrying on the conversation in the book club chat. If you'd like to join that, just send me a message. And make sure that you come back to see what happens with the Children of Jocasta, or pick it up so that you can join in the book club fun as well. That's going to be it for me right now, you guys. I will catch you all next time. Until then, guys, happy crafting. Bye.